Hello, you're watching The Interview on France 24. I'm Philip Crowther in Washington. Our guest today on the France 24 interview is the former US Special Envoy to Sudan and South Sudan. Ambassador Princeton Lyman is now a special advisor here at the United States Institute of Peace. Ambassador Lyman, thank you very much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
Let me start first of all with just a few statistics coming out of South Sudan after the violence there began in mid-December. We've seen over 1,000 dead, over 240,000 displaced. And in terms of a US presence, maybe this is very indicative. The ambassador is left, 2 staff members, and otherwise around 45 members of the military protecting the embassy. And this in a country that the United States very much celebrated its independence. And let me just put a quote to you from Mark Landler in the New York Times, who called South Sudan an American creation. So I'd like to see, first of all, with you, whether you agree with that definition. Is South Sudan an American creation? And does that in turn mean that the United States is responsible for South Sudan being a success story?
Well, it's not quite a good term because it sounds like South Sudan didn't exist before the United States created it. In fact, the South Sudanese fought in 2 civil wars over 40 years for their independence. I like to refer to the U.S. as the midwife of their independence because there's been a tremendous American interest in it for a long time. I was the 6th, and now there's a 7th U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan. South Sudan, we've been the largest donor, and we worked extremely hard to get them to the referendum where they could choose independence. So yes, we had a major role in it, but it was in support of what was a very strong independence movement within the country.
We said it in an interview with France 24 in January of 2011, this was before independence, that South Sudan was a big priority for the Obama administration. Now, it's almost exactly 3 years since that vote for independence. Things are not going well. Let me ask you this again. Should the United States feel responsible for things working out and not getting worse and worse still as they are right now?
Well, I don't think the United States is responsible. I think you have to hold the leaders of South Sudan responsible because they were able to achieve their independence. Their people were counting on them, and they failed to deliver for their people. They bear the responsibility. But all of us involved, all of us supporting them, giving them assistance, etc., are searching to say, could we have done more? Should we have been able to do more to prevent this from happening?
What more should you have done then? Surely, as a special envoy maybe as well, you should have detected the possibility of ethnic violence, for example. The fact that governance isn't going well in South Sudan. Are those things that really you should have noticed?
We knew that there was potential for that, clearly, because during the Civil War there had been a great deal of ethnic violence within South Sudan and political violence. But here's the point. The reason we felt the referendum had to go forward was that if it didn't go forward on time, civil war would likely have resumed. And the overwhelming attention then was to end the civil war between North and South. Now, there were people then saying this SPLM is not up to leading its country. Well, a lot of assistance was being given to them to build that capacity, not only from the US and Europe, but also Ugandans, Kenyans, Ethiopians were there training. Where we did not exert direct influence, and would have been hard to do so, was within the ruling party where these divisions and eruptions took place. And we couldn't really get a handle during this period on the fact that the National Army was really a coalition of militias, not really an integrated army.
But it seems to have taken very, very little for the whole thing to dishevel. The violence became extreme very quickly. The situation has become more and more complex very, very quickly. Ethnic tensions are now clearly a part of this conflict. Is that something you knew was simmering? These ethnic tensions between Dinka and Nuer, did you know they could turn into what we've got now?
What was building up for a year and a half was not a Dinka Nuer, but splits within the government itself. And part of it had nothing to do with the Nuer. These were a number of people inside the government, inside the ruling party, that became deeply concerned with the way President Kiir was governing, relying too much on a small coterie of people from his home area, ignoring the party, ignoring the cabinet. As this challenge within the party progressed during 2013, President Kiir dismissed some of the critics, suspended the Secretary General of the party, then fired his entire cabinet and Riek Machar.
He calls it a coup attempt. Would you agree with that? And should the United States maybe agree with that?
Well, let me come to that, because there was a period after that firing that some people said, you know, it's working. The new cabinet is full of technocrats. They're doing well. Riek Machar is not making difficulties. He's complaining about the same issues, but, you know, it's going along. But as we got toward the end of 2013, it was clear that unless the party was going to be allowed to deal with this range of issues and competitions, there was going to be trouble. And instead of that, President Kiir eliminated the functions of the party. Whether there was a coup attempt, I can't say. Assistant Secretary Linda Thomas-Greenfield suggested that there was not evidence of a coup attempt.
Now, a lot of people right now would say that the independence of South Sudan in the first place might have been a little bit precipitated, despite it being lauded as a success at the time and for a good 2 years afterwards. There are those also who would say that maybe there were other steps that should have been taken before independence for South Sudan. The comparison being made here would be a type of UN civil administration, like the one that was seen in East Timor. Is that something with hindsight that maybe should have happened?
Well, you know, it's very interesting, because actually some people within the State Department made a proposal to me along those lines, that there needed to be something along those lines after independence because of the fragility of the institutions. My feeling at the time was that it would have been unacceptable to the South Sudanese government. They had, after all, been administering South Sudan for 6 years. So I didn't feel that that proposal was politically viable. We did put a lot of effort into the ministries and all the rest, but in hindsight, if that was politically viable, maybe it would have been a good thing to do. I don't think it was viable.
Well, right now, considering the situation that we have in South Sudan, I think it's fair to say it's a case of spiraling violence. Is the White House really, really worried about this? There is a danger that it will be deemed an American failure, though, isn't it?
Look, there is a tremendous amount of concern in the administration, that I know from talking to people and just seeing what's happening. I mean, Ambassador Booth, who is now the envoy, has been out there. He gave up Christmas, New Year's. He's been out there since late December. And I know people are working just the other day, they told me they were working till 1 o'clock in the morning on these issues. Ambassador Page is still in Juba. It's a big concern of the administration. But the humanitarian issues, the danger to American citizens, that's also been a preoccupation.
Well, what is the concrete way forward now then, with ceasefire negotiations taking place as we speak in Ethiopia? What are your hopes for a ceasefire and then, from then on, peace again in South Sudan?
I think it's going to be hard to get a ceasefire until the two sides feel they've accomplished what they can accomplish militarily. That stabilization will probably happen in the next 2-3 weeks. Riek Machar has also put a condition on the release of the detainees. That's a political condition that Kiir has resisted, but there's a lot of pressure on Kiir to do that, and it's a desirable thing to do, because those people are not supporting Riek Machar for president. They are the people who are saying, we've got a problem in the way we govern the country. And I think if he would do that, it would help in getting to the ceasefire. But what some of us have been focusing on is, what does that mean? How do you move from there? And the only way you do that is to say, look, there's going to be a new political process in which all these issues, power sharing, federalism, democracy, human rights, party roles, have to be dealt with.
But it seems a long way off, doesn't it, all of that?
Well, it's going to take time, and that's why...
You mentioned the militaries
right.
in South Sudan. Others are considering joining in as well, possibly. Uganda, possibly. Do you see another foreign military intervening in South Sudan, be it the Ugandan military or possibly even the US military? This is something that always comes up, should there be boots on the ground. Can I get your opinion on that?
I think it'd be very dangerous for any of the neighboring countries to become involved in the war. It just widens the war and it becomes a regional war. We've seen that elsewhere in Africa. Ugandans have sent troops in to help secure around Juba. That's not bad in itself because the collapse of Juba would be disastrous. But they should not engage against Machar. They shouldn't get that engaged, and nor should anybody else. What you have to do is step up aggressively the role of the peacekeeping operation. Have them act aggressively to police a ceasefire and protect civilians and protect a humanitarian program. It's going to be messy for a while. It really is. You can't immediately disarm all these people because you don't have a political structure around doing that. So you may have people in place still with arms for a little while. It's not going to be easy to put this all back together.
Well, I'm sure we'll check in with you over the next few weeks, months. Ambassador Lyman, thank you very much for your time today.
It's been my pleasure.
It was Ambassador Princeton Lyman, former US Special Envoy for Sudan and South Sudan, now a Special Advisor here at the United States Institute of Peace. You've been watching the interview here on France 24. Please do stay tuned for more news.